Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and Giallo enthusiasts. This is Tanner Leeser, your host for all things Giallo here on The King in Giallo. Our next stop on our journey through Giallo cinema is the debut Giallo film from Sergio Martino, The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh, released in 1971. In this video, I will do a deep dive overview, then segue into a full review and GialliTally. The overview will be spoiler-free, the review and GialliTally will not. Here is The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh overview. The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh, also called Blade of the Ripper, is an Italian and Spanish co-production. The film is directed by Sergio Martino. The screenplay is written by Vittorio Caronia, Ernesto Gastaldi, and Eduardo Manzanos Brochero. Music is by Nora Orlandi. The cast consists of Edwin Fenech as Julie Wardh, George Hilton as George Coro, Alberto de Mendoza as Neil Wardh, Ivan Rasimov as Jean, Conchita Earoldi as Carol Brandt, Carlo Alighiero as the Commissioner, and Bruno Corazzari as the Razor Killer. Don't think about it. The movie follows Julie Wardh, an unhappily married woman. Her husband Neil is a good man, but he is always away on business, and the loneliness causes Julie to reflect on her past lover, a horribly abusive man named John. John kindled a dark desire within Julie due to his sadistic actions during sex, which created a new kink for Julie related to blood, something which she is both ashamed to admit and explore. John shows up again in her life at the same time that a razor-wielding killer is slaying young women, and Julie fears it is John, and that he will target her next. This movie came together thanks to the producer Luciano Martino after he helped bring the Giallo boom to life by producing the 1968 proto-sexy-giallo, The Sweet Body of Deborah. He was thrilled to return to produce another Giallo to take on the world, one which would combine both the trappings of the sexy Giallo with the no-holds-barred violence on display in Argento's body count Giallo, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, 1970. The result is one of the greatest Giallo films in the entire canon. Luciano's younger brother, Sergio, directs the film, and although he was relatively new to directing, you would never guess it. This film establishes Sergio Martino as a master of directing sex and violence perfectly in tandem and executing great jumps and thrilling, edge-of-your-seat, nail-biting sequences. The music is one of the most beautifully haunting soundtracks ever. The writing keeps you guessing the whole time, and by the time you get to the climax and think you finally understand everything, the movie pulls out another twist and another. But they never feel forced or contrived. Sergio Martino would keep these elements strong in most all the gialli he would go on to direct. Gastaldi pens one of his best scripts, of course paying respects to Les Diaboliques like always. His character of Julie turns the common character trope of these types of stories on its head and freshens up this wholly new narrative. The acts of sadomasochism and fetishistic bloodletting call back to Gastaldi's previous script seen in Mario Bava's Whip and the Body, 1963. The two films do share a bit in common, but the female characters in each act as opposites. The film was shot on location in Vienna and Spain, adding great beauty to the backdrop of all the mystery. The film seems to have spawned a bit of a feedback loop where he shows that he was inspired by Argento, but Argento would go on to replicate a scene of a murder in a public park in Four Flies on Grey Velvet, 1971, which came out just months later, and the two would seem to continue this trend of sort of copying each other. Martino also infuses elements of Umberto Lenzi and the 1960s jet-set swinger giallo films, but doesn't waste time by following its characters at parties where they seek to find some fun in their lives by being naughty. The film hides its hand by never hinting at its low budget. The casting is expertly done, both in terms of saving money, but also by not tipping the audience off to anything. Martino said that he wanted to avoid casting big names which would have cost more money, would have relegated the film to just another vehicle for that star, and that would suggest what was going to happen to the audience because of the record of the characters that some of these actors have already played for years, chiefly Carol Baker and Jean Sorel. These actors cost more. Carol Baker starring would have made this a Carol Baker Giallo, and casting John Sorel would have incriminated his character and thus spoiled the reveal at the end, because everyone has just come to get used to Sorel being cast as the handsome schemer. Despite the cast in this movie costing a fraction of the budget they could have, the stars herein are top shelf, as demonstrated by the careers they would go on to create. Pieces of Nora Orlandi's amazing score would be taken by Tarantino and used in Kill Bill Volume 2, 2004.
That woman deserves her revenge. And we deserve to die.
I personally do like Tarantino, but in retrospect, I hate that he repurposes so many tracks from Giallo films to the point that laymen don't really know where they actually are from. It's a minor complaint. Edwin Fenech is in her first Giallo where she stars. She had lent an air of sexiness to her previous roles in Top Sensation, 1969, and $5 for an August Moon, 1970. Fenech has the prowess of being able to say yes to an abundance of scenes where she is wearing her birthday suit, but not be viewed as only being cast as utilized for her good looks alone. This film in particular dispels any doubts and proves that she is wonderfully gifted as an actor. The three men are superbly cast as well. Each one brings a new shade to the ensemble. Ivan Rasimov being the dark and violent one, George Hilton being the ambiguous one who could be hiding more than he lets on, or not, and Alberto de Mendoza, who perfectly plays the noble yet stubborn husband. Fun facts: the strange spelling of the name Wardh, being W-A-R-D-H, is because a widow with the surname of Wardh, spelled W-A-R-D, either implored Sergio Martino to change the name or had threatened legal action if he didn't. In any case, the name was modified just in case anybody was thinking of terrorizing this poor widow with defamatory accusations, which nobody was. But I digress. On to the review. Spoilers ahead for those of you who haven't yet seen the film. You've been warned. My prediction for the movie's GialliTally score. At the time of writing this, I already made a prediction which I gave during the viewing video on Patreon before starting the movie. I had seen the film prior to that viewing once, so I predicted perhaps 500 to 550 points, and after watching the movie for a second time now, I have a lot of faith that the movie will at least meet these expectations, if not soar past my prediction. Well, let's begin the GialliTally and review portion of the video. Beginning, as always, with the pre-viewing cliches. The repeat offenders are 1 point for actor, 3 for writer, 3 for composer, and 5 for director. Edwin Fenech was in $5 for an August Moon and Top Sensation, 2 points. George Hilton was in The Sweet Body of Deborah, 1 point. Alberto de Mendoza was in Perversion Story and Psych Out for Murder, 2 points. Ernesto Gastaldi wrote The Forbidden Photos of a Lady Above Suspicion, So Sweet, So Perverse, The Sweet Body of Deborah, The Murder Clinic, and Libido, 15 points. Nora Orlandi composed for Double Face and The Sweet Body of Deborah, 6 points. Cliche points for the title, The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh. I don't have any. I believe in the past when I was putting the GialliTally together, I included the word vice, but took it out because really there's only like 2 films that I could think of that have that word in their title, and they're both Sergio Martino gialli. I felt like I was catering to those 2 movies, so I took it out. So, we have no points for the title. First look, we have 25 points for the Italian director, and an additional 15 points for the movie releasing during the golden age of giallo cinema. And 15 more points for this being a quintessential giallo film. And would you look at that, it is Pilato o'clock. I can see my breath. Must be a cold open, 5 points. The film opens on somebody cruising around, and like that Friedkin film, we're not entirely sure if it's for sex or for a killing. Quite the buffet tonight. This young blonde hops in. The car stops, she tosses her cig and begins undressing. N is for nudity, 5 points. The man begins his slaying. There's some great sound design here of an airplane taking off, which is masking the screams. Airplane, 2 points. Extra point for N is for nudity for someone being nude during a murder, another 5 points. The movie pauses to introduce a text card quoting, "Who else but Sigmund Freud?" This makes 3 films so far that have done this. I ought to include this in a list of cliched things I don't tally, along with characters playing chess. The movie resumes. G is for gloves, 5 points. This is Julie Wardh and her husband, Neil Wardh. He's a busy financial expert who, in the English-speaking versions, I think is an ambassador or a diplomat. We learn in this brief scene that the two were in New York City for a while, but have arrived here in Austria, and that Neil immediately has some business to attend to. Exposition dumping, 2 points. He offers to call her a cab, but Julie can do it herself. If this was filmed today, that moment would have been way more in your face. Girl power. In the taxi, Julie is stopped en route to her destination. This part feels like they are shooting a 1980s horror film in 3D. The officer asks to see their papers as a formality, apologizing and saying that it's because another woman was murdered with a razor 30 minutes ago. He returns their papers and lets them on through. Julie and the cabbie discuss the murders and how the press has made waves in America also. The cabbie mentions they ought to bring back the death penalty, and this begins to stir a flashback within Julie. The flashback shows Julie in a car arguing with her then-boyfriend. She bolts from the car but trips. Her boyfriend begins slapping the piss out of her. Typical 1970s Italian misogyny. Woman is slapped, 5 points. The music doesn't have to be this good, but it is. Once she is a little bloodied, the man goes in for kisses. Necking, 5 points. He rips her clothes off and continues. If it isn't blaringly made obvious by the acting and the music, Julie is less haunted by the abuse and more deeply troubled by the fact that she enjoyed it. She is snapped out of her daydream and dropped off. Z is for zoom, 5 points. But outside her destination, she notices the same car her ex-lover has. Julie is told her apartment is ready for her, and she goes inside. Once in, she draws a bath. The door buzzes, and she makes herself decent to answer it. Julie does a magic trick here, watch. No belt. Belt. At the door are some flowers brought up by the doorboy, but from who? She reads the letter. Worst part of you is the best thing you've got, and it will always be mine. From John. I've read less romantic things. Julie seems lost in her thoughts. Cut to Julie out on the town, checking in with Neil over the phone. They've been in Austria for 3 days and have only spent 1 night together. Her friends are quipping that she must be a widow now. T is for telephone, 5 points. This is Carroll. She introduces Julie to her cousin, George, who recently returned from Australia. They tell Julie that they recently found out that they're related and that they are the sole heirs to an uncle's fortune. George and Julie seem to hit it off, or at least he's trying hard to make a connection, and, more disturbing, Carroll is hardcore trying to get into bed with her newly met cousin. Gratuitous 1970s dancing, 2 points. This next moment here is a callback to Blow Up, 1966, but with nudity. A man is curious if this woman's clothes are made of paper, and so he rips them off. Typical 1970s Italian misogyny, woman is molested, groped, or sexually assaulted, 7 points. The 2 women are nude wrestling, attracting a modest crowd around them. Julie is enjoying herself too, so that means it's okay. Across the room, she locks eyes with John. Carroll says that he was pestering her to know when Julie would be back. Carroll asks what the big deal is. Seriously? Julie leaves. F is for fashion, 5 points. Best to get it out of the way, right? John grabs Julie and offers to give her a ride. She tells him off, but he becomes obstinate. He continues to taunt her, but she doesn't relent. Suddenly, Neil pulls up and John lets her go. The 2 men approach each other, stare down, then Neil smacks John. Hell yeah, brother. Typical 1970s Italian misogyny, woman is saved by a man, 10 points. John begins laughing maniacally before walking off, laughing all the while. Julie runs to Neil to stop him from pursuing. She warns him that John enjoys hurting others. The scene transitions to another flashback. This scene shows Julie sprawled out on a bed as John pours booze on her, then smashes a green bottle, which magically becomes white shards of glass as it rains down over her. John cuts Julie with the broken bottleneck, undresses her, and fondles her. The memory shows Julie really enjoying herself, prompting her to wake up in horror. Neil asks her if something is wrong, if this is about that man, but Julie remains silent. Q is for questions, 5 points. Cut to the blonde from the party scene being dropped off. She undresses and hops in the shower. A car pulls up outside, and an unseen individual approaches the front door. Extra points for G is for gloves, black gloves, 5 points. Close up on a door handle or creeping through an ajar door, 5 points. This is usually seen from the opposite side, but I'll grant it. The killer pulls a razor blade and stalks closer. First person POV of the killer, 5 points. Killer's identity is hidden due to the framing and editing, 2 points. This kill is an homage to Psycho 1960. Bathtub murder scene, 7 points. Carroll and Julie are hanging out, they banter, they read about the latest murder in the paper, then they have a deeper conversation. In essence, Julie has some doubts about Neil, recognizes she has her own personal demons to overcome, and fears John because he won't accept defeat. The women arrive at Julie's, but the maid informs her there is a man here to see her husband, waiting inside. They assume it is John and prepare to kick him out, but it is George. He admits that he mainly came to see her, but will still meet with Neil. Julie is not too receptive to George's insistence. The cousins flirt, then he leaves. Carroll says this,
Io, cugino no, me lo farei.
No words. The gals go out to lunch, but everything is booked. But actually not, for George had booked extra tables so Julie could have her pick of where she wanted to sit. At some point during the meal, Carroll receives a call, then returns to say her goodbyes. Alone now, George invites Julie out for some fun. She declines him, but we then cut to them riding together. Reckless driving, 5 points. Urban locales, 2 points. And foreign locales, Vienna, 5 points. She asks where he's taking her, but George insists on keeping it a surprise. She insists that he take her home, but he refuses.
Mi porti subito a casa.
Dopo, Julie, dopo.
Le ho detto di portarmi
Non si preoccupi.
Y is for yelling. Extra for a hysterical woman yelling. She's not, I know. 10 points. They continue their ride. George drops Julie off, who thanks him for the wonderful time. George seems to behave like he was expecting more than just a handshake. Julie enters her home, hears the phone, and when she answers it, a man on the other end says he loves her, causing Julie to respond that she had already thanked George for the fun time, but she believes that she shouldn't see him anymore because she fears she might be liking him. So she asks him to never call, and then George agrees. In person. Then who is on the phone? He admits he likes her. She tries to slow things down. He says that he wants her. The two kiss. I is for infidelity, 5 points. Cut to them outside, still kissing. George asks Julie to come up to his place, but she rejects this. Suddenly, a car peels past them. It is Jean's car. Julie jumps into George's arms. She begs to be taken away, anywhere, she says. George takes the opportunity and walks to his front door. After a brief stare down, Julie relents and follows him up. Within seconds, the two are getting down to business. Outside, the car parks, and the unseen man creeps through the shadows, sneaks around back, and peers through the window. V is for voyeur, extra for it being an act of infidelity, 10 points. Aardvarking, 10 points. More flowers arrive for Mrs. Wardh. The note plugs Martino's future giallo. I like how he must have thought this quote was so good that he decided, why not use this for the title? Neil asks Julie who the flowers are from, but she says anonymous. L is for lies, 5 points. Neil asks if something is the matter or if he's done anything wrong, and offers that he is always willing to talk, especially if there's something more that he can do. Julie just says nothing is wrong. Neil is spied on by an unseen person who watches as he leaves, then dials up Julie at home. We're not certain yet, but let's just add extra points for T is for telephone for the killer making a call, 5 points. The man blackmails Julie into paying him 20,000 shillings tonight, or else he will tell her husband about her adulterous act he witnessed. Extra points for I is for infidelity for an act of blackmail occurring after the fact, 5 points. Over at Carroll's, Julie discusses her predicament. This bleeds over into discussing the black car, the phone calls, and the woman from the party being the latest victim. Carroll remarks that it could be John who is the killer, but rescinds this, stating the killer goes after whores, unlike John. J is for J and B, 5 points. They discuss her affair, to which Carroll suggests that she should just go with George, that Neil will understand. Carroll offers to give George's number. Julie states that she's going to meet the man later at Palmenhaus Schönbrunn with the 20,000, but Carroll offers to go in her stead. She believes it will be John, and she wants to laugh in his face, but remarks that if it is the maniac, then she might be next. After all, she says she is slutty. The two go down for breakfast. Carroll arrives at the park and waits for the man. As Julie sits at home watching a race, the scene flashes to Carroll several times, who continues to wait. Note, these aren't flashbacks for when I tally up flashback sequences. Julie becomes impatient and nervous. At the park, an attendant walks around calling that they are closing soon. Carroll goes to leave, but on her way out, feels that she's being stalked by someone. She thinks she spies someone, but it turns out to be only a groundskeeper. She asks how to get out, and he points her in the right direction, remarking that she'd better hurry lest she get locked into the park. The razor comes out, and the killer gives chase to Carroll. Foot chase, 5 points. The chase is short-lived as Carroll trips very quickly. The groundskeeper hears the screams, but goes back to his work. The killer begins hacking away with the razor. The sounds of the struggle finally grab the worker's attention, and he runs to help, but when he arrives, he only finds Carroll dead on the ground. The police arrive and begin their inquiry with the groundskeeper. Animals featured: pets, a lizard, a bird, a bat. That sounds like a Giallo title. 2 points. The police are speaking with John as a possible suspect, given that he knew Carroll for many years. They take him in for questioning. Julie, John, and the detective are sitting together. Julie is obligated to state why she believes John is their suspect, but all she can say is that she knows he is capable of the level of carnage and that he drives a black car. But she falters on relaying how and why she knows that he is capable of such violence, for she refuses to admit their past excursions while together. She tells police that he sent her notes, and he admits to them. Yes, he did. They used to be lovers, and he wanted to remind her of the good times and see if she'd agree to meet him again. The detective asks her about the phone calls being John, but she says the caller masked their voice. He relays to her that John couldn't be Carroll's killer because he was across town at a bowling alley during the murder. A is for alibi, 5 points. John taunts Julie by telling the inspector that she should be checked for her alibi because after 2 years of being together, he can verify that she has a bloodlust. He releases both of them and calls in the next person, George. John remarks about Julie having a new lover, and George and Julie express a need to speak again. But Neil arrives to pick up Julie as George is called in for questioning. Later on, George and Julie are talking. She expresses regrets, but also expresses that she still wants to see George, but it is too risky. George mentions that it could have been Julie in Carroll's place. She leaves, but they agree to meet up in the future. Now, halfway through the movie, Julie pulls into a parking garage. As she walks through the garage, it is revealed that she is not alone. The lights go out, and Julie is far from the elevator. Suddenly, 2 different sets of headlights begin intermittently flashing on and off. One of the cars speeds in her direction and barely misses clipping her. She runs to the elevator and is forced to wait for an uncomfortable amount of time for the lift to arrive. It opens, and the killer attacks her from the other side of the doors. He misses and fumbles the razor, giving Julie enough time to hide. The cat and mouse game is on. Julie sneaks into her car and locks the doors. She waits. Once she finds an opening, she starts the car and drives across the garage and makes a dash for the elevator. She's safe. Okay, I think she's good now. She rushes out and pounds on the door to be let in. I can say hysterical woman now, I think. It's all justified, no judgment. Spiral staircase, 5 points. She sees a shadow creeping up. The door opens and we see it's just a neighbor on his way up. Neil confronts Julie about whatever the hell is going on. She tells him about the encounter and he asks if it was John, but she doesn't know. Neil says they'll find out soon enough. He grabs a gat and comments that you have to handle people like this on your own, then asks where he lives. She agrees to take him at once. Outside the house, Neil goes to confront John and tells Julie to wait in the car. His entire noble gesture here is on shaky ground with that last one. I don't know, maybe the best thing would have been for him to have her leave in the car, Julie sees the black car and runs to be with Neil. He agrees. They enter inside. The lights aren't working, and so they proceed by torchlight. Not sure how proper that is to say, but I'm not going to say by lighter light. All the animals from earlier try their best to jump scare the couple. Neil finds a camera on the floor, stating it has taken a picture, and pockets the camera. They follow the sounds of dripping water. Inside the bathroom, they find John dead in the bathtub. Extra points for Z is for zoom, for a zoom on a dead victim. 5 points. His throat has been slit. Julie nearly faints, and Neil carries her out. Outside, the car is now gone, and inside the backseat of their car are more flowers. The note, though seemingly in John's handwriting, is a reference to Adam and Eve, and an allusion to Julie and George from an earlier scene with the apple. Julie then has a vivid nightmare of John, Carroll, and George. The nightmare involves Carroll taunting Julie with blood on her hands, and John dripping blood onto her while slapping her. The sound design is pretty good, laughing and the water dripping from previously. Julie awakens. This might be generous, but I don't explicitly state in my rules whether a nightmare is or is not qualified, so H is for hallucinations, 5 points. Neil shows Julie that he developed the photo on John's camera, and it is the man who attacked her in the garage, but she doesn't recognize him. Odd clue, 5 points. Neil says he had suspected John because he was Julie's former lover, but now it is apparent that the killer is somebody else. I'll also generously add mistaken identity, 5 points. Neil goes to take the photo to the inspector. Julie calls George and begs for him to take her away. He tells her he will take her to Spain. Neil finds a letter left by Julie saying she's left. The maid says she left before noon. This woman is dropped off by her friend. She is the next target for our killer, who waits for her inside her apartment. U is for undercover, 5 points. The woman talks to a friend on the phone, and once she hangs up, she is attacked. After a brief struggle, we see the killer, and it is revealed to be just some guy. He goes for the kill, but she Uno reverses him and stabs him in the chest with a knife. K is for knife. Extra points for the knife being bloodied. 10 points. A woman outmuscles a man. 15 points. Eat your heart out, final girl cliche. Oh shit! The man wait until darks her, but he dies. One final jump. This feels like it's trying to be a slasher like 9 years too early. Fucking dope. George and Julie are underwater spearfishing. Animals killed, upgrade that cliche to 5 total by adding 3 points. Keep an eye out, you two. Constance could be down here. The sight of blood affects Julie, and she swims to the surface. George puts the moves on her, hops into the boat, and the two start rocking to the motion of the ocean. Julie and George read in the papers that the murderer in Vienna was killed. George says now they can focus on just them. They split up to prepare for dinner, and while alone, a boy approaches Julie with flowers sent from a man who is already gone. C is for children, 5 points. The note says John, but funny enough, looks like it says Sean. Julie drops the flowers and begins running away. She tries to look for George, but he is long gone. An arm clad in black and wielding a spear gun leans out from hiding and takes aim at Julie. It fires, and the bolt goes right past Julie and pierces a truck tire. She cannot find whoever fired the shot, and she runs away.
Scusa, si sente male, signora?
Extra points for Q is for questions for someone yelling a question, 5 points. The onlookers do that stereotypical movie thing where all the bystanders give way too much attention to the character and just crowd around her and follow everything she does. She leaves. Julie races across town and arrives at the place where she's staying with George. Inside, she hears the pitter-patter of water dripping and sees reddish liquid on the floor. She has a series of flashbacks to John dead in the bathtub. The camera does this great pendulum effect, which ends right as George grabs Julie, which causes her to faint. He lays her on the bed and grabs a bottle of cologne to use as smelling salts, which works fine enough. I guess not. He leaves to find a doctor. The doctor tells George she must have suffered a fright to be in a state like this. He gives George the number for another doctor should anything arise. The doctor says she will sleep well into the evening and departs. George immediately follows the source of the dripping and finds a water pipe dripping rusted water, which might appear blood-like. The second doctor reluctantly agrees to come by and help. Julie wakes up and calls out to George. She receives no answer and follows the sound of the dripping. I should have added this earlier, I feel. Art featured, 5 points. Over the puddle, Julie notices someone standing there, just behind the curtain. She takes an object and violently attacks the person. The sound of metallic clanging is heard as we see that she is only hitting the pipe itself. It is a trick. It is only the shoes. Julie begins to break down. She's attacked by John, who it is revealed now is not dead. Someone faked their own death, 5 points. John renders Julie unconscious. In the car, George mentions to the second doctor that he thinks Julie's condition is related to a strange fixation she has with blood, in which she is both attracted to and repulsed by it, and it may be related to her past domineering partner. John drags Julie into the kitchen. He then locks shut the kitchen window, transfers her fingerprints onto black adhesive tape, and seals the windows. He then pulls out the ice cube tray from the freezer. He unleashes a heavy flow of gas from the pipe, takes an ice cube, refills the tray, and returns it so it won't be apparent that a cube was taken, and then sets the ice cube beneath the latch to the kitchen door and leaves. As we watch the ice cube slowly melt away and fall, locking the door and setting the scene to appear that Julie has taken her own life. We watch as George and the doctor make their way back, as well as see Julie come to, but pass out again from the gas inhalation. The two arrive and enter inside. They instantly smell the gas. They go to the kitchen but find the door locked. After breaking it down, they find Julie unconscious on the floor. They turn off the gas, open the window, and carry her out. The doctor tells George to call the hospital as he applies CPR. The police are breaking the news to Neil that his wife died. Neil laments that she would never have done this if she had remained with him. Neil says that George is guilty, then leaves. On his way out, Neil asks about a funeral, but the officer tells him that they will need to hold the body for a few days. Cut to John in a desert. A car pulls up and George comes out. John demands to be paid now so that he may leave for Rio. George tells him that he's safe. No one saw him, and even if the police can't pin Julie's death onto the maniac, they figured out how to get around it, and they all have alibis. George tells John that his new passport says his name is John MacDonald, a Canadian citizen, and that he never met Julie. They both will get away with murder, and their plan can never be traced back to them unless John is discovered to not be dead. George goes to get John's money, but shoots him dead, tying up all his loose ends. E is for eyeballs, 5 points. I know you can't see his eyes, but I was waiting this whole damn movie for a close-up on eyes, and this is the shit I get. George wipes his prints and plants the gun on John, or John MacDonald, which I think is hysterical. Who is gonna believe that this guy killed himself by shooting himself in the chest? Betrayal by the killer, or the accomplice is killed, 5 points. And the killer is killed by somebody, 10 points. We follow Neil as he gets off the train and walks to his car. Inside, he meets with George, who asks him if they have sent his money yet. He says no, not yet, after they see a death certificate. Neil reveals then that he has creditors after him, whom he hopes he can keep at bay for another few days so he won't have to declare bankruptcy. George says that with his cousin Carroll dead, he is now the sole heir to his uncle's estate. The two men drive off. While driving away, Neil mentions that they shouldn't be seen together. George remarks about his plan to kill while a maniac was on the loose was just genius. He reveals that Neil had killed Carroll and he had arranged for Julie's murder, and they can pin it all on the maniac. Neil then adds that he burned the black clothes they wore when committing the murders. Driving down a winding mountain road, 2 points. Hidden identity of the killer until the final moments, 5 points. Neil notices a pair of black gloves on the dash and remarks that those should be gotten rid of as well, but George asks why. They're new. The two men erupt into laughter. This scene is so unintentionally funny to me. They appear almost like lovers. Neil asks about John, and George's behavior about how he handled it seems to put Neil on edge, who is worried that the insurance company might drag out matters if they have reason to suspect foul play, but George assuages him that it won't. They will never find the connection. As they drive along, Neil notices a woman walking along the side of the road who looks like Julie. Neil tells George, who thinks he's seeing things. Neil argues for them to go back and make sure. They put the car in reverse to ascertain the truth. The woman is without a doubt Julie. At least, that is 100% Edwin Fenech. She turns towards them and slowly paces in their direction. Hot on her heels are law enforcement. Car chase, 7 points. The cops block the road. George steers one way, then the other, but ultimately crashes the car over the side. The men must be magicians because they've vanished from the car. They watch on as the car rolls through the river. I'll save you the trouble. They're dead. The killer dies accidentally, extra for falling, 10 points. Someone dies by falling to their death, 15 points. I gotta say, these movies bend the rules more times than they follow them straightforward. The inspector remarks that if the coroner hadn't noticed that Carroll Baxter was killed in a way which stood out from the maniac's killings, they would have never looked deeper. Pathology forensics to solve, 3 points. The inspector apologizes to Julie for holding her while they pretended she was dead so they could wait for the men to slip up, and commends Dr. Arbe for saving her life. Dr. Arbe gets in the car to drive Julie, and she thanks him. The music seems to strongly imply a connection between them.
Lei mi ha salvato la vita.
As they drive off, the end credits roll. Real quick, I'm going to add O is for obsession. This is for Julie, but I will add extra points for the maniac who seems obsessed. 10 points. Add extra points for L is for lies for the killer lying about an alibi. 5 points. Add extra points for A is for alibi for an alibi getting investigated. 5 points. S is for secrets. I could have given this right away to Julie. Regardless, extra points for the killer having an impossible to predict motivation. 10 points. And that's The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh. This one is a classic. I admitted during the viewing that I didn't entirely remember the plot of this movie and only really remembered the betrayal scene in the desert. I remembered enjoying the movie, but probably felt it wasn't as good as Martino's later slasher-giallo Torso, 1973, and I regret going through some films with the mindset of stacking the movie up against others. Regardless, this one is great. Great writing, acting, music, and directing. The thrills are also great. What a debut into the genre. I don't know how I would rank this among all gialli, but certainly it makes for an amazing first giallo for a director who would come to help define the genre for all time. Let's segue to the GialliTally cliches for this movie. Post-giallo viewing cliches. The reason for the killing. We have 2 here. The maniac could be said to be psychopathy or obsession, but the 3 men are doing this for greed and gain. Considering that I only choose one, I will choose the one worth more points. So, mental illness, psychopathy, or obsession, 7 points. The reason for the investigation, police investigator, 2 points. Bonus points, the style bonus. The film gives us a decent amount of zooms, fades, focus rack transitions, and the dream sequences certainly have some great imagery. There's also slow motion used, a spinning shot, this pendulum effect. The movie utilizes several stylistic techniques previously seen, but doesn't go overboard or do them in a way that calls attention to it. Out of a max total of 25 points, I will give The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh 19 points for its style bonus. Soundtrack. Indeed, 15 points. Bad effects. I guess I gotta say no. We don't see any fake bodies in the cars, and the gore effects are not really seen, and what is seen is done pretty well. No points. Final look. Extra points. The Deadpool, tallying how many kills and deaths are featured in the film. I break it down as thus: 10 points per kill or death scene for the main Deadpool, plus any stylistic kill multipliers, which we didn't add yet, plus the knife kill bonus. We have the first victim, slashed with a razor, 10 points. The second victim, throat slit with a razor, adds 7 for 17 points. Carroll, slashed with a razor, 10 points. The maniac, stabbed with a knife, which I count as impaling, adds 6 and 5 for 21 points. John, shot dead, 10 points. George, car crash, vehicular, add 9 for 19 points. And Neil, car crash, vehicular, add 9 for 19 points. Extended Deadpool for those other deaths mentioned but not seen, I'll give 3 points for each. We do know that the maniac has killed before the events of the film play out, but we never get a number, so it does seem like it has been a lot. Despite this, we can assume at least one victim prior, so 3 points. Carroll and George's uncle, 3 points. Red herrings for the total number of legitimate suspects in the film. 5 points per legit suspect are awarded. This movie is again one of the more difficult ones to say for certainty, but let's go ahead and add Jean, 5 points. George, 5 points. Carroll, 5 points. Neil, 5 points. Julie, 5 points. And the maniac, 5 points. I feel like a case could be made for each of these characters at least. Flashback sequences, 5 points each. 1, 2, and 3 for 15 points for flashbacks. Nudity, I award 5 points for ass, 7 for breasts, and 10 for genitalia. Strap in, because this is going to be a lot. We have breasts. Julie, breasts. Julie, breasts and ass. Breasts, then ass. Breasts. Julie, breasts. Ass, then breasts. Julie, breasts and ass. Carroll, breasts. We do see her topless again towards the end of the same scene. These photos, breasts and ass, and breasts for this one. Julie, breasts. And finally, Julie once more, breasts. For a total of 116 points for nudity. Ladies and gentlemen, for The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh, I awarded the film an AZ score of 19 out of 26. With the bonus points for these, we have a modified score total of 155 points. And for the full GialliTally score, I award The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh a GialliTally score of 728 points. No fucking way. Compared to A Quiet Place to Kill with 579 points, The Strange Vice of Mrs. Wardh is the new GialliTally lead with 728 points, putting Perversion Story in third with 571 points, and The Bird with the Crystal Plumage is out of the top 3 in fourth now with 564 points. I predicted that the movie would end up getting around 500 to 550, and I noticed all the nudity, so expected to be close, but damn, I didn't think the movie would break through 600 and 700 points. I had to do the math several times, but ended up always with 728. I'm not sure how long it will be until another film comes anywhere close to 700 plus points, but this is definitely making the GialliTally exciting in my book. But like I've stated before, these points don't mean a movie is better or worse. Please like this video, share it with your friends if they are horror fans or cinephiles, subscribe to The King in Giallo if you haven't yet, and if you have any questions, thoughts, curiosities, or concerns, leave those below in the comments section and I will get back to you. Give The King in Giallo a follow on Instagram and a like on Facebook. Next time on The King in Giallo will be the overview, review, and GialliTally for Lucio Fulci's second Giallo film, A Lizard in a Woman's Skin, 1971. Thank you very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.